There's a word that has long since fallen out of use in our language and our culture. And in my opinion, that's a little bit of a shame, and it's maybe something that we ought to reinstate. This word is frith. From this word frith we get our word for friendship and friend. We also get our word freedom. In the Old English, the term to love came from this word frith, which was Phrygian, and also the word for a lord, which was a friar. To summarise this word, we could say that it means peace. But it means a little bit more than just peace. It also means safety and protection and sanctuary. In a Wiccan way, you may say that it means do no harm. We also get our word fealty from this word, and this is also a word that seems to have fallen out of use. Fealty means swearing loyalty to a lord or a leader. It's not really something we have a concept of much these days. But with this term fealty, there was a payback in that it was also the Lord's duty to swear allegiance to the tribe, to the people, and to honour them and to ensure that peace and harmony prevailed for the people around him. So in many ways, frith meant also justice. It meant doing what is right by your people, by your tribe, by your family. In fact, it meant doing whatever it took to maintain peace and harmony between people. For a community, frith was a central tenet that actually ensured the continuity of those people and that society. It meant doing no harm in any way that would cause trouble for the people around you, that would wreak havoc on your own kind, or that would in any way destroy the reputation or the livelihood of those who are your kin, your kindred, or your beloved tribespeople, your beloved community that you dwell in. Literally, it meant retaining friendship. The word came from a Proto-Indo-European word, prias, which meant something like the peace, love, security and acceptance of being amongst one's own people. To do anything that would hurt one's own people, to destroy the friendship of the tribe and the cohesion of society around you, was considered a serious transgression. So frith had connotations with law, but not law as we may understand it today, but more law as in peacekeeping and maintaining peace. So the laws of frith would maintain that friendship was restored amongst one's own people, and this was a basic tenet of keeping society together. The opposite idea of frith, that of being frithless, literally meant being surrounded by people that you could not trust, people that somehow would want to backstab you or destroy your reputation and livelihood, and this was considered to be an extremely sorrowful state. So in many ways we have forgotten this sense and connection between love and loyalty and law. And in many ways we seem never to have justice served in our society. It never really seems to fulfill its promise of restoring rights. And so it would be nice to reinstate this concept of frith and friendship and restoring peace and balance. To do this in heathen societies, they would have frithmen. And frithmen would be the peacekeepers, the ones who would try and restore balance between people. They would also ensure that nobody in society would attempt to wreak havoc on any of its own members. So anybody who would try and make trouble for anybody or destroy the reputation or the livelihood of somebody else would not go unnoticed or unpunished by the Frith men. So these men formed Frith guilds, and the Frith guilds would be responsible for the settling of disputes, much in the way that we may call policemen peacemakers these days and peacekeepers, although they rarely seem to live up to that role. As we are all society in this day and age, then as modern heathens, we should not tolerate slander and gossip and trying to destroy the standing of any other members of this society. And this is the very concept of Frith. So Frith also meant safety and sanctuary and protection, and this was an important part of the heathen faith before the conversion to Christianity. We once, as heathens, worshipped in what were called frithyards in early Anglo-Saxon England. Now, a frithyard was a sanctuary that was set apart from the normal world, and it was a place where no harm and no fighting was allowed to take place. It was an area and sanctuary of friendship. So there were laws such as you could not bring weapons into the sanctuary unless they were ritual weapons. There was not necessarily any temple in this area, although there may have been a feasting hall either inside or just outside of the frithyard, the frithgard. The frithgard, or the frithgarth, was surrounded by a hedge or a fence to separate it from the everyday world, and once inside that you had to act in a certain manner of respect, not to offend the gods, not to offend the spirits and the landvitir in that place. Now the hedge was a very vital part of the frithyard. It was surrounded by either a hawthorn hedge or a wicker fence. Now it's odd that our words for witchcraft come from this concept of this separating fence. So a hedge was a haig or a hag in Anglo-Saxon, and this came down to us as the term for a witch, or it was made of wicker, which is the word that we have now for witchcraft. So inside this frithgard was usually some kind of sacred place, like a sacred tree, or it marked a sacred grove, or some kind of special place like a sacred well. And it's often said that although there could be no harm amongst kindred in this place, it was a place where sacrifice would take place. It was also a place of worship and burying your dead and ceremony. There was no building in this place. It was an open air place, but there were idols or ways or weos, and also irminsuls, and these were carved wooden idols. So later these frithgards got taken over by the Christian Church, and it was very much the same open area kind of concept. There was not a church as such in the early days, there was just a stone cross around which people gathered. Now the early Christian Church wanted to try and get rid of these places, but all they could really do in the end was take them into their own faith and take them over. So where we have churches today, very often they are built on very old and ancient sites. In fact, some of the sites may be very old, going back to the Iron Age and the Roman eras, if not before. So these places were so holy that you could not offend the spirits there. This was the whole idea of Frith. There was no fighting amongst people, there was no arguing, there was no crude or coarse behaviour, And even if you wanted to defecate, you had to leave the area and go outside. And this was called Ganga Alpha. This is the term for having a shit. And it actually literally meant to go and chase away the elves. And it refers to this leaving the Frithgarth and going into another place to commit crude bodily acts. So as I say, these Frithgarths, Frithgards, Frithyards were taken over by the early Anglo-Saxon church. And this idea of safety and protection and sanctuary also became a part of the early Christian church. Many people are at odds with Christianity, and many Christians are at odds with pagans. But here in Britain, I don't think that distinction is quite as harsh, because we can understand that it evolved from one thing to another. And to be honest, the early Celtic church and the early Anglo-Saxon church were just this far away from the pagan and heathen faith and religion. So there was an evolution there that we can still see when we visit these places and sense their heathen and pagan origins. So in some of these churches there is what is still known as a frith stool, and this is a leftover from these early Anglo-Saxon Christian Frithgarths. And the remaining churches, and I think there are 3 in this country. Now one of them is in Hexham Abbey, and that is a long way away from me. But 2 of them are just down the road, a little bit down the road. One of them is in Sprotborough Church near Doncaster, and that is that way, like 15 miles as the crow flies, up that road and round the bend a bit and up the other road. But I didn't go and visit there because that is, although it may be an Anglo-Saxon chair, it is possibly a little later, maybe 13th, 14th century, due to the decoration on it, and as far as I can work out, it may not be that accessible, because you can only ever find one photograph that is from the 1930s online. I actually rang the vicar and she wasn't that friendly, and she never rang me back, so I'm not sure that it's really a tourist destination to go and visit their frith stool. And as I've got limited time, I didn't go there. But if I go just a little bit beyond there and over the Humber, I will end up in the town of Beverley. And Beverley has one of the best frith stools in England, and it is the 3rd frith stool. And so I went to visit Beverley Minster to get you some footage of this frith stool. Now this is where some pagans may get uncomfortable as I take you around early Christian sites to talk to you about heathenism. The church at Beverley Minster, it's standing on the site of a church that was there in at least the 700s and was probably an older frithyard, as evidenced by the frith stool that still is retained in the church. The present church is from the 12th century. It was destroyed. There was a church that was there very early. It was rebuilt around 930, 850. Between that, it was destroyed a bit, it was rebuilt a bit, it was destroyed a bit, it was rebuilt a bit. And so it's a very ancient site, and it's got a very beautiful atmosphere in the whole area, and Beverley itself is a very beautiful town with a very gentle and frith-like energy. So this frith stool in Beverley Minster actually dates back 1,000 years. It is a very old chair, and it dates back to the very early Anglo-Saxons. It's at least 1,000 years old, possibly older. And the reason that it's probably still there is it's a very heavy piece of stone. And in many ways it reminds me of these sacred stones like the stone of Scone, on which kings would sit and receive some kind of divine benediction and authority. Now, the idea of the Frith stool was that a criminal could seek sanctuary by sitting on the Frith stool, and particularly where it was at the altar, it was a particularly sacred and honoured and respected area of Frith or sanctuary. So there are different areas of sanctuary around Beverley Church, and Beverley was quite unique in that the whole town was considered a area of Frith or sanctuary or protection, and this was quite unusual. Now, the laws of Frith were written by Albert the Great and around the 9th century, sometime around the late 800s. And it was written into the Anglo-Saxon laws that criminals could come to a church, and if they could find sanctuary in the church, then they had a right to restore peace and harmony and seek a resolution of disputes and not be tried for their crimes if they could resolve it. As I say, the whole town of Beverley became an area of sanctuary, so that people from all over England would go and try and seek this idea of Frith at Beverley. And if you could enter Beverley and you were 1.5 miles, say, from the Minster, then you had protection. And if anybody wanted to come after you and arrest you or kill you or seek any vengeance in any way, they would be fined severely for breaking the Frith. Another area of Frith was reaching the church door. So once you got inside the church door, you got more sanctuary, you got more benefit. There was another step further that was at the choir stalls. If you got even there, got further there, you got even more sanctuary, and you got even more benefits. And if you could go right up to the altar and sit on the Frith stool, then you had the most benefit of all, and the greatest amount of Frith and the greatest amount of protection. If you were killed at the altar, then the crime would result in death for anyone who was pursuing you. So these were the laws of sanctuary, and they were instated for Beverley in 934 by Athelstan, and he had declared the whole town a place of sacredness. These laws actually continued for at least 600 years, but were then destroyed by the reign of Henry VIII, and Henry VIII left the Catholic Church and created his own church and destroyed this law of Frith. So if you understand the murder of Thomas à Becket, which was done under the guidance of Henry VIII, the school have condoned it, you understand how dreadful this crime was of killing Thomas à Becket in the church by the altar. But that aside, that's another bit of history. So your rights of sanctuary actually were 30 days in Beverley, and you could seek sanctuary for 30 days. Usually it was around about 7 days. And during this 30 days, the officials and the church would try and seek peace and resolution for you. And that's quite a good long time to try and resolve a dispute. If you couldn't resolve your dispute in that time, then you were taken out of the church and returned to whoever was seeking you for law and order. But there were some choices at this point. Usually the choice was to become an outlaw, which meant that anybody could kill or hunt you or arrest you or do anything they liked to you with total impunity. If you became an outlaw, you were probably sent overseas actually, so you'd lose your family, your livelihood and your home. The other option was to go to trial and try and seek a fair trial. But Beverley had a third option, and the third option was to swear an oath of loyalty to the church and become a Frith man. And you became a Frith man. You therefore had sanctuary in the town of Beverley for the rest of your life, so long as you never left that town. So there was a certain benefits to seeking this almighty place of Beverley for your right of Frith and your right of sanctuary. So the sacredness of the Frithgarth of Beverley Minster and surrounding the church of Beverley, and in fact the whole town of Beverley itself, has another legend attached to it. And this legend is concerning the harrying of the north by William the Conqueror. Now, if you don't know the tale of the harrying of the north, in brief, William the Conqueror arrived from Normandy in 1066 and defeated Thingy in the eye, got an arrow in the eye, defeated him at the Battle of Hastings. But that was not the end of it. Harold, because the family of Harold had important power in the north, and many of the Vikings and the Danes still held lands up there, and they instigated a bit of a rebellion against William, and this went on for many years. So William was never really quite comfortable on the English throne for quite some time. William actually got his revenge by ransacking the lands of the north, and he was so angry that he did this with total cruelty and no holds barred. So he went up to the north, from the Midlands all the way up to York and Northumberland, and he totally devastated the countryside. He killed villages of innocent people. He hounded anybody, women, children, didn't bother him. He killed the lot of them. Not only did he do that, but he destroyed the manors and the farms, and he destroyed the tools of the people and the livestock of the people. And it's said at the end of this burning and pillaging and destruction, he'd actually killed somewhere in the region of 100 to 150,000 people and 80,000 livestock. Now, the tales even go so far as that he actually ploughed salt into the fields in all of the north, so that not only did he kill the people and destroy their farms, but he ensured that they would starve, not only through the next winter, but possibly for many years and many harvests. And so this was a particularly cruel and despicable phase of history. And so William the Conqueror took his troops into the north, intent on destruction. And the story goes that he reached the lands of Beverley and camped just outside the town. And when the townsfolk realised this, they fled in fear to seek the sanctuary of the church. Now, William the Conqueror had no intention of respecting the laws of Frith or the sanctuary of Beverley Minster. And it's said that he sent one of his generals in there called Tustein, and he had a large army of troops with him, intent on entering the church on horseback, riding down the villagers and cutting them down beneath him as they fled. But the story says that as he entered the church through the main doors, Tustein's horse actually bolted, and it threw him onto the hard ground of the church, and he broke his neck. Not only did he break his neck, but he died in utter agony, and it's said that his hands were twisted into some monstrous gestures as he died. In fact, it was a horrific ending. And his troops saw this and were terrified, and possibly understood that this sanctuary had been violated. And so they abandoned the church, they fled, and they returned to William and told him what had happened. And when William the Conqueror heard this, it said that he actually restored the rights of sanctuary to Beverley Minster and to the whole town. And not only did he do this, but he gave extra lands to the church. And so when the land around the church of Beverley was being harried and pillaged and burnt to the ground, the land of Beverley and town of Beverley itself was spared. So in many ways the sanctity of the sacred state of Frith had not been violated, and in no way had the Christian God or any of the gods or spirits in that place been offended by violence, bad behaviour or destruction. And it's a strange tale, and this is a tale that should remind us in this time and in this day and age of the sanctuary and the sacredness of this concept of Frith. So please let me know in the comments if you yourself hold a concept of Frith, or if it's something that you would like to see in your life or in society as a whole, if you think it has value. Let me know if you feel that Frith has been violated and it's something that you sincerely felt the lack of, or whether you yourself have offered Frith to another. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and I hope to speak to you all again soon. Bye.